She was known as the untouched rose of her mountain village, a symbol of purity and grace that everyone admired from afar. But when a powerful Arab oil magnate arrived with an offer that changed everything, her world was turned upside down in ways she never imagined. What happened after their wedding ceremony would shock her to her very core, revealing secrets that would test the very fabric of her beliefs and challenge everything she thought she knew about love, power, and sacrifice. This is a story that will leave you breathless, showing how sometimes the greatest battles are fought not with weapons, but with the human heart. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if the story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. High in the remote mountains of Morocco, where ancient Berber traditions still held sway and modern life seemed like a distant dream, lived a young woman named Zara. At 24, she had earned a reputation that stretched far beyond her small village of Tafraout, nestled between towering red cliffs and endless olive groves. The villagers called her Wardat al-Jabal, the mountain rose, not just for her striking beauty, but for her unwavering moral compass and the respect she commanded from everyone who knew her. Zara's dark skin seemed to glow with an inner radiance. Her eyes held depths that spoke of wisdom beyond her years, and her graceful movements reminded people of the legendary Berber queens of old. She carried herself with a dignity that made even the eldest village women nod in approval, though she came from one of the most modest families in Tafraout. Her father, Hassan, was a simple shepherd who had spent his entire life tending to the same flock his grandfather had raised, while her mother, Fatima, wove intricate carpets that occasionally found their way to the markets in distant Marrakesh. Despite their humble circumstances, Zara had always been different. While other girls her age dreamed of marriage and children, she spent her evenings reading books borrowed from the village's small library, teaching herself French and Arabic alongside her native Tamazight. She had dreams that stretched beyond the mountain peaks surrounding their village, dreams of perhaps becoming a teacher, or even traveling to the cities she had only read about in worn geography textbooks. The village respected her choice to remain unmarried, something almost unheard of for a woman of her age in their traditional community. Many young men had asked for her hand over the years, some from neighboring villages who had heard tales of her beauty and character. But Zara had politely declined each proposal, explaining to her increasingly worried parents that she was waiting for something more, though she could never quite articulate what that more might be. "She's too educated for her own good," some of the older women would whisper, though not unkindly. "Books fill her head with ideas that don't belong in a place like this." But Zara's father, Hassan, would defend his daughter fiercely. "Intelligence is a gift from Allah," he would say, his weathered hands gesturing toward the mountains. "If he blessed her with a mind that seeks knowledge, who are we to cage it?" The village itself seemed frozen in time, with its narrow stone pathways winding between houses built into the mountainside, their walls the same rust-red color as the surrounding cliffs. Morning mist would roll through the valleys, carrying the scent of wild herbs and the distant sound of goat bells. Life moved at the pace of the seasons, olive harvests, the arrival of trading caravans, the celebration of ancient festivals that had been observed for centuries. Zara found peace in this rhythm, even as part of her yearned for something beyond it. She would often climb to the highest point above the village at sunset, looking out over the vast landscape that stretched toward the Atlantic coast, wondering what lay beyond those distant horizons. The wind would catch her dark hair, and she would close her eyes, feeling connected to something larger than herself, to the generations of strong women who had stood on these same cliffs, to the dreams that seemed to call from somewhere beyond. The mountains. Her daily routine was simple but fulfilling. She would wake before dawn to help her mother with the household tasks, then spend the morning teaching the village children to read and write in a makeshift classroom beneath the large olive tree in the village center. The local imam had initially been skeptical of a woman taking on such a role, but when he saw how eagerly the children learned and how respectfully Zara conducted herself, he gave his blessing. In the afternoons, she would help her father with the sheep, using these quiet hours to think and dream. The animals seemed to sense her gentle nature, following her without the need for harsh commands. She knew each sheep by name, could predict the weather by watching their behavior, and often found herself having long conversations with them about her hopes and fears. "You understand me better than most people," she would tell her favorite Away, a gentle creature with intelligent eyes named Baraka. "You don't judge me for wanting more than what I have." The other young women in the village admired Zara but also found her somewhat mysterious. She was kind and helpful, always ready to assist with a difficult birth or comfort a grieving family, but she held part of herself apart. She participated in their gatherings and celebrations, but there was always a sense that her thoughts were elsewhere, focused on horizons they couldn't see. "She's waiting for a prince to come and rescue her," some would joke, though not entirely unkindly. But Zara knew it wasn't a prince she was waiting for, it was herself. She was waiting to discover who she truly was beneath the expectations and limitations that surrounded her. She had a feeling, deep in her bones, that her life was meant for something different, something that would test every principle she held dear. The village had its own beauty and wisdom, its own way of protecting those who belonged to it. But Zara felt like a bird whose wings had grown too large for its nest, even as she loved that nest with all her heart. She honored her family's traditions while secretly harboring dreams that would have shocked the elderly women who praised her modesty. At night, she would lie on the flat roof of their small house, staring up at stars that seemed close enough to touch in the clear mountain air. She would make silent promises to herself that she would never compromise her values for convenience, that she would never let fear keep her from living fully, that whatever life brought, she would face it with courage and grace. She had no way of knowing that these promises would soon be tested in ways she could never have imagined, or that the peaceful rhythm of her mountain village life was about to be shattered by forces far beyond her control. The winds of change were already stirring in distant cities, in boardrooms and palaces where powerful men made decisions that would ripple outward, like stones thrown into still water. But for now, in these last precious days of innocence, Zara remained the mountain rose, untouched, unbowed, and unaware that her carefully guarded world was about to collide with realities that would challenge everything she believed about herself and her destiny. The morning that would change everything began like any other, with the call to prayer echoing across the valley and the first light of dawn painting the mountain peaks in shades of gold and rose. Zara had no premonition of what was coming as she went about her usual routine, greeting neighbors, tending to household tasks, preparing for another day of teaching the village children. She could not have known that hundreds of miles away, in a gleaming skyscraper in Casablanca, a conversation was taking place that would soon send tremors through her quiet mountain existence. A conversation between powerful men who saw the world as a chessboard, where people like her were merely pieces to be moved according to their grand strategies. The mountain rose was about to discover that even in the most remote corners of the earth, no one is truly safe from the reach of those who wield money and influence like weapons. Her story was about to begin in earnest, though she wouldn't realize it until the dust clouds appeared on the horizon, carrying with them a future she had never chosen and a destiny she was not prepared to face. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The first sign of change came not with fanfare, but with silence. It was mid-afternoon when old Yusuf, who spent his days watching the winding mountain road from his perch near the village entrance, suddenly stopped his usual storytelling and stood up with an expression of bewilderment. The children gathered Around him followed his gaze toward the distant valley, where an unusual dust cloud was rising against the clear blue sky. "What kind of vehicles make dust like that?" young Ahmed asked, squinting into the distance. Youssef had seen many things in his 80 years: French colonial convoys, Moroccan military patrols, even the occasional government official's car struggling up their mountain path. But this was different. The dust cloud was too large, too persistent, and it was moving with a purpose that made his weathered hands grip his walking stick more tightly. Within the hour, the entire village had gathered along the main pathway, drawn by an almost magnetic curiosity. Even the animals seemed to sense something unusual. The goats stopped their eternal bleating, and the dogs paced restlessly, their ears pricked forward. Zara stood among the crowd, her teaching session forgotten, as she watched the approaching convoy with a mixture of fascination and unease. The first vehicle to crest the final ridge was unlike anything the villagers had ever seen. It was a massive black SUV with tinted windows that reflected the mountain sunlight like dark mirrors. Behind it came 3 more identical vehicles, moving in perfect formation as if guided by military precision. The convoy proceeded slowly down the rocky path, the engine's low rumble echoing off the canyon walls like distant thunder. "Government officials?" whispered Fatima, unconsciously smoothing her worn jalaba. "Too many cars for that," Hassan replied, his shepherd's instincts telling him this was something far more significant than a routine inspection. As the convoy entered the village square, the lead vehicle came to a halt near the ancient well that had served the community for generations. The contrast was striking: gleaming modern machinery surrounded by stone buildings that had weathered centuries of mountain storms. For a long moment, nothing happened. The tinted windows revealed nothing of the occupants, and the only sound was the settling of hot metal and the nervous shuffling of feet. Then, with a soft hiss of pneumatic systems, the rear door of the lead vehicle opened. The man who emerged commanded attention before he even straightened to his full height. Omar al-Rashid was tall and imposing, his perfectly tailored charcoal suit somehow untouched by the dusty journey. His graying beard was meticulously groomed, his dark eyes sharp and calculating as they swept across the assembled villagers. There was an aura of controlled power about him, the unmistakable presence of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Behind him stepped 2 other men. One appeared to be a secretary or assistant, clutching a leather portfolio, while the other had the alert posture and scanning eyes of a bodyguard. From the other vehicles emerged additional personnel, all maintaining a respectful distance while clearly establishing a protective perimeter around their employer. The village imam, recognizing the gravity of the situation, stepped forward to offer the traditional greeting. Omar acknowledged him with a nod that was polite but brief, his attention already focused on scanning the crowd. When his gaze found Hassan, there was a subtle shift in his expression, a flicker of recognition, though they had never met. "I am looking for Hassan ben Ali," Omar announced, his voice carrying clearly across the square despite its measured tone. The accent was refined Moroccan Arabic, educated and urban, but tinged with something else, the confidence of extreme wealth. Hassan stepped forward, his calloused hand suddenly feeling very rough as he prepared to greet this unexpected visitor. "I am Hassan ben Ali, sir. How may we serve you?" Omar studied the shepherd for a long moment, taking in his simple clothes, his honest face, the way he stood with dignity despite being clearly out of his depth. "I am Omar al-Rashid. Perhaps you have heard the name?" The murmur that rippled through the crowd suggested that some had indeed heard of him. Omar al-Rashid was one of Morocco's most influential oil executives, a man whose business empire stretched from the Sahara to the Mediterranean. His name appeared in newspapers when they occasionally made their way to the village, usually in connection with government deals worth billions of dirhams. "I have come to speak with you about a matter of great importance," Omar continued, his tone suggesting this was not a conversation that could be postponed or declined. Perhaps we could speak privately? Hassan glanced nervously at his fellow villagers, many of whom were nodding encouragingly despite their own confusion. The tradition of hospitality demanded that he invite this stranger into his home, regardless of how intimidating the circumstances might be. "Of course, sir. My home is humble, but you are welcome." As Hassan led the way toward his small house, Zara felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. She watched her father's retreating figure with growing unease, though she couldn't have explained why. Something about Omar al-Rashid's arrival felt ominous. Like storm clouds gathering on a previously clear day, the secretary and bodyguard followed Hassan and Omar, while the remaining personnel stayed with the vehicles, creating an informal barrier between the villagers and the unfolding meeting. Conversations broke out in hushed tones as neighbors speculated about what could have brought such a powerful man to their remote community. "Maybe he wants to buy land for a hotel," suggested one of the shopkeepers, though the idea seemed far-fetched, even as he said it. "Or perhaps there's oil under our mountains," added another, though the geological surveys had never indicated such possibilities. Zara found herself unable to participate in the speculation. A growing sense of dread was settling in her stomach, an intuitive understanding that whatever was happening inside her family's small house would change everything. She thought about her father's surprised expression when Omar had asked for him specifically, as if Hassan himself was puzzled by the attention. Inside the modest dwelling, Omar took in his surroundings with the quick, analytical gaze of a man accustomed to assessing value and opportunity. The house was clean but sparse, furnished with handmade pieces that spoke of generations of careful use. The carpets on the floor were clearly Fatima's work, intricate patterns that displayed real artistic skill despite their worn edges. Hassan offered tea, following the rituals of hospitality, even though his hand shook slightly as he prepared it. Omar accepted graciously, understanding that refusing would be an insult that could derail the entire conversation before it began. "You have a daughter," Omar said, once the tea had been served and the preliminary courtesies observed. It wasn't a question. Hassan nodded, his confusion evident. "Yes, sir, Zara. She is She is a good girl. Very educated, very respectful." "I know," Omar replied, and something in his tone made Hassan's blood run cold. "I know quite a lot about your daughter, Hassan ben Ali. I know about her reputation in this village and the surrounding communities. I know about her character, her intelligence, her purity." The word hung in the air like a blade, sharp and dangerous. Hassan set down his tea glass with hands that were no longer steady. "Sir, I don't understand. How do you know about my daughter?" "We are simple people. We have no connection to." Omar raised a hand, cutting him off with a gesture that was both polite and absolute. "I have a son, Hassan. His name is Yasin, and he is 28 years old. He has been educated at the finest universities in Europe and America. He speaks 5 languages fluently and has a doctorate in international business. By any measure, he is an exceptional young man." Hassan nodded uncertainly, unsure where this was leading but increasingly certain he wouldn't like the destination. "However," Omar continued, his voice taking on a harder edge, "Yasin has shown no interest in marriage. He is too intellectual, too focused on abstract pursuits. He needs a wife who will ground him, someone who comes from solid moral foundations, someone who has not been corrupted by the influences that surround wealthy families." The words hit Hassan like physical blows. The implication was becoming clear, though his mind refused to fully accept what he was hearing. "Someone like your daughter," Omar concluded, his dark eyes fixed on Hassan's face with laser-like intensity. Hassan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the stone floor. "Sir, with all respect, my daughter is not for sale. She is not a commodity to be purchased or traded." Omar's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. I am not trying to buy your daughter, Hassan. I am offering her an opportunity that any sensible family would consider a blessing from Allah himself. My son will inherit an empire worth billions. Your daughter would want for nothing: education, travel, luxury beyond anything she could imagine. In this village. And if she refuses? Hassan asked, though something in Omar's manner suggested this wasn't really a negotiation. Omar was quiet for a long moment, sipping his tea and gazing out the small window toward the village square where his convoy waited. When he spoke again, his voice was soft but carried an unmistakable threat. Hassan, you are a shepherd. This village depends on the goodwill of various government agencies for everything. The road that brings supplies, the electrical lines that provide power, the water rights that keep your wells flowing. These are all privileges that can be reconsidered. If the right pressure is applied in the right places. The threat was delivered so calmly, so matter-of-factly, that it took a moment for Hassan to fully process what he had heard. This man was casually discussing the destruction of their entire community as if it were a minor business decision. You are threatening my village? Hassan whispered, his voice hoarse with shock. I am explaining reality, Omar replied. I have the power to improve your daughter's life beyond measure, or to ensure that this village becomes uninhabitable within 6 months. The choice is yours, but let me be clear. I will have an answer before I leave today. My son needs a wife, and I have decided that your daughter is the most suitable candidate. This is not a request that will be repeated. Hassan sank back into his chair, the weight of the impossible choice crushing down on him like a landslide. Outside, he could hear the normal sounds of village life continuing: children playing, goats bleating, neighbors calling to each other. All of it suddenly seemed fragile, temporary, dependent on the whims of the man sitting across from him. I need to speak with my daughter, Hassan said finally, his voice barely audible. Omar smiled, but it was a cold expression that never reached his eyes. Of course, family consultation is important. But Hassan, he leaned forward slightly, make sure she understands exactly what is at stake. Not just for her, but for everyone she has ever cared about. As Hassan left his own house to find Zara, he felt as though he were walking toward a cliff edge. Behind him sat a man who held the power to destroy everything they had built over generations. And ahead lay a conversation that would shatter his daughter's world. The mountain rose was about to learn that sometimes the most beautiful flowers are the ones that powerful men decide to pluck. Zara was helping her mother prepare the evening meal when she saw her father approaching across the courtyard. Something in his walk, the heavy, defeated shuffle so different from his usual confident stride, made her set down the ceramic bowl she'd been holding. The expression on Hassan's weathered face was one she had never seen before, a mixture of anguish, fear, and something that looked disturbingly like resignation. Baba, she called softly, using the childhood term that still came naturally when she was worried. What did the man want? Hassan stopped just inside the doorway, his eyes unable to meet his daughter's concerned gaze. Behind him, through the small window, they could see Omar's convoy still positioned in the village square, like sleeping predators. The presence of those vehicles had changed the very atmosphere of Tafraout, transforming their peaceful home into something that felt alien and threatened. Fatima emerged from the kitchen, flour still dusting her hands from the bread she'd been kneading. She took one look at her husband's face and immediately understood that their world had just shifted on its axis. Hassan, she whispered, moving to stand beside their daughter. What has happened? Hassan finally looked up, and Zara was shocked to see tears gathering in his eyes. Her father was the strongest man she knew, a man who had once carried an injured sheep down the mountain for 3 hours without stopping, who had never shown fear during the worst storms or the most difficult seasons. Seeing him like this was more terrifying than any words he might speak. The man, Omar al-Rashid. He has made a proposal, Hassan began, his voice cracking on the words. For marriage, for you, Zara. The words seemed to hang in the air like smoke, visible but incomprehensible. Zara blinked several times, certain she had misheard. Marriage? She repeated slowly. But Baba, I don't understand. I've never met this man. How can he propose marriage? To someone he's never even spoken to? Hassan's hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Not him, Habibti, his son. Omar al-Rashid wants you to marry his son, Yasin. The explanation did nothing to clarify the situation for Zara. If anything, it made less sense. She had built her entire adult life around the principle of choice, the choice to remain unmarried until she found someone who truly understood her, the choice to pursue education and independence, the choice to define her own path through life. I don't understand, she said again, her voice becoming sharper with rising panic. Why would he think I would agree to marry a stranger? What did you tell him? Hassan's silence stretched out like a physical thing, heavy and oppressive. When he finally spoke, his words came out in a rush, as if speaking quickly might somehow lessen their impact. He says his son needs a wife from a good family, someone with strong moral character. He has investigated our family, Zara. He knows about your reputation, your education, your... Hassan struggled with the words, your purity. He believes you would be perfect for his son. Zara felt the blood drain from her face. The idea that someone had been watching her, studying her life from a distance, making decisions about her future, without her knowledge, was violating in a way that made her feel physically sick. And what did you tell him? She asked, though something in her father's demeanor already suggested the answer. Hassan finally met her eyes, and she saw her own future crumbling in his gaze. I told him I needed to speak with you first. That's not an answer, Baba, Zara said, her voice rising despite her efforts to remain calm. What did you tell him about whether I would agree? The silence that followed was deafening. Fatima moved closer to her daughter, her protective instincts overriding her usual deference to her husband's decisions. Hassan, Fatima said firmly, tell us everything. What exactly did this man say to you? Hassan collapsed into his favorite chair, suddenly looking every one of his 58 years. He didn't just make an offer, Fatima. He made it clear that refusing was not really an option. What do you mean? Zara demanded, though a cold dread was already spreading through her chest. He said ... double quotes. Hassan's voice broke completely, and he had to start again. He said he has the power to cut off our water rights, to have the road closed, to stop the electricity from reaching the village. He can destroy Tafraout, Zara. He can make it impossible for anyone here to survive. The words hit Zara like a physical blow. She staggered backward, her hand reaching out instinctively to steady herself against the wall. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person she had ever cared about, every child she had taught to read, every elderly neighbor who depended on the community for survival. He's threatening the entire village, she whispered. To force me into marriage? Hassan nodded miserably. He says his son is a good man, educated and kind. He says you would have a life of luxury and opportunity. But Zara, the way he spoke, it wasn't really a request. It was an ultimatum. Zara began pacing the small room, her mind racing as she tried to process the impossible situation. Everything she had worked for, everything she had dreamed of, was being swept away by the whims of a man she had never met. But worse than that, her refusal would condemn innocent people who had done nothing wrong except live in the same village. As her, there has to be another way, she said desperately. We could leave the village, go somewhere else. We could, where would we go? Hassan interrupted gently. I am an old shepherd, Zara. Your mother is a weaver. We have no money, no connections, no skills that would help us survive in the city. And what about the others? What about Youssef, who can barely walk? What about the widow Ayiha with her 6 children? Can we abandon them to face Omar's revenge? Because we ran away? The weight of responsibility settled on Zara's shoulders like a lead blanket. She had always known that her choices affected others, but she had never imagined being in a position where her personal freedom was directly connected to the welfare of an entire community. Fatima moved to embrace her daughter, but Zara stepped away, needing space to think. She walked to the window and stared out at the village square, where Omar's vehicles waited like silent threats. Some of the village children were playing nearby, their laughter a sharp contrast to the darkness that had invaded their world. "What do we know about the sun?" she asked finally, her voice hollow. Hassan looked surprised by the question. "Omar says he is 28, highly educated. A doctorate from a European university. He speaks many languages and works in the family business." "That's not what I mean," Zara said. "What kind of man is he? Is he kind? Is he cruel? Does he want this marriage, or is he being forced just like I am?" Hassan spread his hands helplessly. "I don't know, Habibti." Omar spoke of him as if he were discussing a business transaction. "He said the boy is too intellectual, that he needs a wife who will ground him in traditional values." Zara turned away from the window, her decision forming like a stone in her chest. She had spent her entire life believing that she could control her own destiny through education, determination, and moral strength. Now she was learning that there were forces in the world that could crush individual will like an insect, regardless of how righteous that will might be. "When does he want an answer?" she asked. "Before he leaves today," Hassan replied. "He is waiting in the village center. He expects us to return within the hour." Zara closed her eyes, trying to imagine the life that was being forced upon her. A stranger's house in a distant city, marriage. To a man she had never met, separation from everything familiar and beloved. The death of every dream she had ever cherished. But then she thought about little Ahmed, who had just learned to write his name. About Athia's children, who depended on the village's support for survival. About her own parents, who would suffer alongside everyone else if she chose her personal freedom over their collective welfare. "I need a few minutes alone," she said quietly. Hassan and Fatima exchanged worried glances, but respected their daughter's request. As they left the room, Zara sank to her knees on the prayer rug her grandmother had woven, though she wasn't sure if what she was about to do qualified as prayer. "Allah," she whispered, "if this is your will, give me the strength to bear it. If it is not, show me another path. But please, don't let innocent people suffer because of my choices." She remained there for several minutes, searching for some sign, some flash of inspiration that would reveal a third option she hadn't considered. But the only sound was the distant murmur of voices from the village square and the beating of her own heart. When she finally stood, her decision was made. It wasn't the choice she wanted, but it was the only choice she could live with. She had spent her life believing that true strength came from staying true to one's principles. Now she was about to discover that sometimes the greatest strength lies in sacrificing those principles for something larger than oneself. She walked back to where her parents waited, seeing in their faces the same mixture of hope and dread that she felt in her own heart. "I will marry him," she said simply, the words feeling like stones in her mouth. "But I have conditions." Hassan's face crumpled with relief and grief in equal measure. "What conditions, Habibti?" "I want to meet him first, before any final agreements are made. I want to speak with him privately, to understand what kind of man I'm being given to. And I want his father to guarantee in writing that no harm will come to this village regardless of what happens between his son and me." Hassan nodded eagerly. "I will ask. Omar seems like a man who respects directness." As they prepared to return to the village square, Zara took one last look around the small house that had been her sanctuary for 24 years. Tomorrow she would probably never see it again. The life she had carefully built, the dreams she had nurtured, the freedom she had fought to preserve, all of it was about to end. But as they walked toward Omar's convoy, Zara held her head high. She was sacrificing her own happiness, but she was saving her community. In some ways, perhaps that was its own kind of strength, its own form of honor. The mountain rose was about to be transplanted to foreign soil, but she was determined to bloom wherever she was planted, no matter how hostile the environment might prove to be. The walk back to the village square felt like a funeral procession. Hassan moved with the deliberate steps of a man carrying an unbearable burden, while Zara maintained the composed exterior that had earned her such respect in the community. But inside, she felt as though she were fragmenting into 1,000 pieces, each step taking her further from the life she had known and closer to an uncertain future. The villagers had not dispersed. If anything, more people had gathered, drawn by the magnetic pull of unprecedented drama. They lined the pathways and clustered in doorways, their faces showing a mixture of curiosity and concern. Children pressed close to their mothers, sensing the tension even if they couldn't understand its source. Omar al-Rashid stood beside his lead vehicle, checking an expensive watch with the impatience of a man accustomed to punctuality. When he saw Hassan approaching with his family, his expression shifted into something that might have been satisfaction. Behind him, his assistant held a leather portfolio that seemed to contain documents already prepared for various contingencies. "Hassan Ben Ali," Omar called out as they drew near. "Have you had your family discussion?" Hassan nodded, his throat too dry for immediate speech. Zara stepped forward before her father could respond, drawing surprised glances from the assembled villagers. It was unusual for a young woman to speak directly to a strange man in such circumstances, but these were far from usual circumstances. "I am Zara ben Hassan," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the square. "I understand you wish me to marry your son." Omar studied her with the calculating gaze of a man evaluating precious merchandise. He took in her straight posture, the intelligence in her dark eyes, the way she met his stare without flinching. After a long moment, he nodded slowly. "Indeed, you are even more impressive than my reports suggested." The casual mention of reports sent another chill through Zara, but she didn't allow it to show on her face. "I have conditions." A murmur rippled through the watching crowd. Omar's eyebrows rose slightly, as if he hadn't expected resistance but found it intriguing rather than annoying. "Conditions?" he repeated, his tone neutral. "First, I want to meet your son before any final agreements are made. I want to speak with him privately, to understand his character and his feelings about this arrangement." Omar's assistant shifted. Nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of negotiations from someone they had expected to simply accept their terms. But Omar himself seemed almost amused. "Reasonable," he said. "Yasin is actually here with me. He's been waiting in the second vehicle, reviewing some business documents. I had hoped to introduce you after the preliminary arrangements were settled, but I see no harm in reversing that order." Zara felt a flutter of surprise mixed with apprehension. The man she was supposed to marry had been sitting just meters away. During this entire ordeal, hidden behind tinted glass like some mysterious figure from a fairy tale. "Second," she continued, pressing forward before her courage could fail, "I want a written guarantee that this village and its people will be protected, regardless of what happens between your son and me. Their welfare should not depend on my compliance." This request clearly caught Omar off guard. His eyes narrowed slightly, and for the first time, his confident demeanor showed a crack of uncertainty. "You are concerned about the village's welfare even when contemplating marriage into one of Morocco's wealthiest families?" he asked. "These people are my family too," Zara replied firmly. "I will not purchase my own security with their suffering." Omar was quiet for a long moment, studying her face as if trying to solve a complex puzzle. When he spoke again, his voice carried a note of grudging respect. You are not what I expected, Zara ben Hassan. Most young women in your position would be focused on the advantages this marriage could bring them. Most young women are not being forced to choose between their freedom and their community's survival. Zara responded, her composure finally cracking slightly to reveal the steel beneath. The watching villagers held their collective breath. No one had ever heard anyone speak to a man of Omar's stature with such directness, especially not a young unmarried woman. Hassan looked as though he might faint from the stress of watching his daughter navigate such dangerous waters. Omar's stern expression slowly transformed into something that might have been a smile. Very well, both conditions are acceptable. You may speak with Yasin privately, and I will provide written assurances regarding the village's continued prosperity. But understand this, the marriage itself is not negotiable. These conditions merely concern the manner in which it will proceed. He turned toward the second vehicle and made a subtle gesture. The rear door opened, and a figure emerged that immediately captured Zara's attention in ways she hadn't anticipated. Yasin al-Rashid was tall like his father, but where Omar projected aggressive authority, his son seemed to carry an air of thoughtful reserve. He had the same sharp features and intelligent eyes, but softened by something that looked almost like sensitivity. His expensive clothes were slightly rumpled, as if he had been sitting in cramped quarters for too long, and he carried a worn leather book in one hand. He approached the group with careful steps, his gaze moving from his father to Hassan to Zara, with obvious uncertainty. When their eyes met, Zara felt a shock of recognition, not that she had seen him before, but that she recognized something in his expression that mirrored her own feelings about this situation. Yasin, Omar said briskly. This is Zara ben Hassan, your intended bride. She has requested a private conversation with you before the final arrangements are completed. Yasin's face showed surprise, followed quickly by what looked like relief. Of course, he said, his voice gentler than his father's, tinged with an educated accent that suggested extensive time abroad. I would welcome the opportunity to speak with Miss Zara if she is comfortable with that. The formal politeness of his response, so different from his father's commanding tone, gave Zara her first real hope that this situation might not be entirely hopeless. At least the man seemed to possess basic courtesy and consideration for her feelings. Where would you suggest we talk? She asked. Yasin glanced around the crowded square, clearly as uncomfortable as she was with conducting such a personal conversation under the watchful eyes of the entire village. Perhaps we could walk toward the edge of the village? Somewhere we can speak freely without. He gestured vaguely at the assembled crowd. Omar looked as though he might object, but Zara's steady gaze seemed to remind him that he had already agreed to her conditions. With obvious reluctance, he nodded. 20 minutes, he said firmly. I have other appointments in Marrakesh this evening. As Zara and Yasin walked away from the crowd, heading toward the path that led to the olive groves, Zara could feel dozens of eyes following their movement. The weight of speculation and worry from her neighbors was almost as heavy as her anxiety about the conversation ahead. They walked in silence for several minutes, moving past the last houses of the village and into the grove where Zara had spent so many peaceful afternoons with her father's sheep. The familiar setting helped calm her nerves slightly, though nothing could entirely ease the surreal nature of the situation. Finally, when they were far enough from the village to speak without being overheard, Yasin stopped beside an ancient olive tree whose twisted trunk had provided shade for countless generations. I owe you an apology, he said suddenly, his words surprising her with their directness. An apology? Yasin sat down on a large stone that had probably served as a resting spot for shepherds for centuries, gesturing for her to take a seat on a nearby boulder. For my father's methods. For the way this has been arranged without your consent. For the threats and manipulation that brought us to this point. Zara studied his face, searching for signs of deception or manipulation, but found only what appeared to be genuine regret and embarrassment. "Did you know?" she asked, "about what he was planning?" Yasin's laugh was bitter and completely lacking in humor. "I knew he had been making inquiries about suitable wives. I knew he was frustrated with my reluctance to marry within our social circle, but I didn't know about this specific plan until yesterday, when he informed me we would be traveling to meet my future bride." "And what did you say when he told you?" "I argued with him," Yasin admitted, running a hand through his dark hair. "I told him I wanted to choose my own wife, that arranged marriages were archaic and unfair to everyone involved. But my father is not a man who accepts opposition to his plans." Zara felt a spark of connection with this stranger, who seemed to be as much a victim of Omar's machinations as she was. "So you're being forced into this too?" "In a different way, perhaps," Yasin said carefully. "My father controls my inheritance, my position in the company, my entire future. He has made it clear that defying him on this matter would mean losing everything I've worked toward. But that's still a choice, even if it's a terrible one. You don't even have that much." The honesty in his admission was refreshing after hours of veiled threats and political maneuvering. For the first time since this ordeal began, Zara felt as though she was talking to a real person rather than a pawn in someone else's game. "What kind of marriage would this be?" she asked quietly. "If we go through with it, I mean, what would you expect from me?" Yasin was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the mountains that surrounded the valley. "I don't know," he said finally. "I've never been married before. I've never even been in a serious relationship, to be honest. My father has always disapproved of the women I've shown interest in, and eventually I stopped trying." "What did he disapprove of?" "Their independence mainly. Their careers, their education, their unwillingness to defer to his judgment in all things. He wants a daughter-in-law who will be grateful for the privilege of joining our family, someone who won't question his authority or influence his son toward different values." Zara absorbed this information, beginning to understand the deeper game Omar was playing. "And he thinks I'll be grateful and submissive because I come from a poor village? I think he believes your moral character and traditional upbringing will balance out what he sees as my excessive intellectualism and independence. He wants someone who will anchor me to family obligations rather than encourage me to pursue my own interests." "What are your own interests?" Yasin's face brightened slightly for the first time since their conversation began. "Literature, philosophy, social justice issues. I've been working on programs to improve education and economic opportunities in rural communities. My father tolerates these activities as long as they don't interfere with business operations, but he sees them as distractions from my real responsibilities." Despite everything, Zara found herself intrigued. A man who cared about education and rural development was not what she had expected from the son of a ruthless oil executive. "If we marry," she said slowly, "what would happen to those interests?" "I don't know," Yasin replied honestly. "That would partly depend on you. If you wanted to be involved in that kind of work, it might actually strengthen my position to pursue it. A wife who supported community development would be harder for my father to dismiss as naive idealism. The possibility that this forced marriage might actually create opportunities rather than destroying them was something Zara hadn't considered. It didn't erase the fundamental injustice of the situation, but it offered a glimmer of hope that her sacrifice might serve a purpose beyond mere survival. "I should ask," Yasin said hesitantly, "do you have anyone here that someone you care about who would be hurt by this arrangement?" Zara shook her head. "No romantic attachments, if that's what you mean. I've been waiting for." She paused, realizing how naive her old dreams sounded in light of current circumstances. "I had different plans for my life." "What kind of plans?" "Teaching, maybe. Traveling, learning, making my own choices about everything from what to wear to where to." Live to whom to marry. Her voice caught slightly on the last words. Yasin nodded with understanding that seemed genuine. Those are good plans. Important plans. I'm sorry they're being taken away from you. They sat in silence for a moment, both contemplating the future. That was being imposed upon them. In the distance, they could see Omar's convoy waiting in the village square, a constant reminder that their time for private conversation was limited. If we do this, Zara said finally, I want your promise that you'll treat me as a partner, not a possession. I want to continue learning, growing, contributing something meaningful to the world. I won't be just a decorative wife who produces children and makes your father happy. Yasin met her gaze directly. I promise. In fact, I think I'd prefer that kind of partnership to the alternative. I've never wanted a submissive wife who would defer to my every decision. That kind of relationship would be as much a prison for me as it would be for you. As they walked back toward the village, Zara felt something she hadn't expected, a tentative sense of possibility. This was still not the life she had chosen, and the circumstances of their meeting were still fundamentally wrong. But perhaps, with mutual respect and shared values, they could build something worthwhile. From the ruins of their individual dreams, the real test would come when they had to face Omar's final demands and sign the documents that would seal their fate. But for the first time since this nightmare began, Zara felt as though she might not be facing it entirely alone. The return to the village square felt different this time. Where Zara had walked away feeling like a condemned prisoner, she now moved with the measured steps of someone who had glimpsed a path through the darkness, even if that path was narrow and uncertain. Yasin walked beside her, maintaining a respectful distance that spoke to his understanding of the delicate cultural dynamics at play. Omar was pacing beside his vehicle when they approached, his expensive shoes clicking against the ancient stones with increasing impatience. His assistant stood nearby with the leather portfolio, while the bodyguard maintained his vigilant scan of the surrounding area. The villagers had grown quieter during their absence, as if sensing that whatever decision was about to be announced would change their community forever. Well, Omar demanded as soon as they were within earshot, have you had your discussion? Zara exchanged a quick glance with Yasin, drawing strength from the connection they had established during their conversation. We have spoken, she said carefully. I am prepared to accept the marriage proposal, provided you honor the conditions we discussed. Omar's face showed satisfaction mixed with something that might have been surprise. Perhaps he had expected more resistance, more negotiation. Excellent. My assistant has already prepared the necessary documents. Hassan stepped forward, his relief palpable but tempered by concern for his daughter. What documents? He asked nervously. The assistant opened his portfolio and withdrew several sheets of expensive paper, each bearing official letterheads and legal seals. Marriage contract, financial arrangements, and guarantees regarding the village's continued prosperity, he announced in a crisp, professional tone. I want to read everything before signing anything, Zara said firmly, surprising everyone with her directness. Omar's eyebrows rose. You read legal Arabic? I read several languages, Zara replied, accepting the documents from the assistant. Education was always important in our family. As she began reviewing the papers, her expression grew increasingly troubled. The marriage contract was straightforward enough, establishing the union between Yasin al-Rashid and Zara ben Hassan according to Islamic law. But the financial arrangements were staggering in their scope and implications. This says you're paying my family 50 million dirhams, she said, looking up at Omar with shock. That's more money than this entire village has seen in a century. Omar shrugged as if the sum was insignificant. Your father is giving me his most precious possession. The compensation should reflect her value. The casual way he spoke about purchasing her like merchandise made Zara's stomach turn, but she forced herself to continue reading. The village protection guarantees were more comprehensive than she had dared hope. Infrastructure improvements, educational funding, medical services, and economic development programs that would transform Tafraout from an isolated mountain community into a thriving modern village. "This is very generous," Hassan said, reading over his daughter's shoulder with wonder. "Too generous. What are you not telling us?" Omar's smile was sharp and knowing. "Hassan Ben Ali, you asked the right questions. There is indeed one additional requirement that we haven't discussed." Zara felt her heart sink. She had known the arrangements. Seemed too favorable, too considerate of her conditions. "What requirement?" "The marriage must produce an heir within 18 months, Omar said bluntly. "My son needs to secure the family line, and I need assurance that this union will serve its primary purpose." The words hit Zara like a physical blow. In all their discussions about partnership and mutual respect, the fundamental reality of what marriage meant in Omar's world had been left unspoken. She was not being acquired as a companion or even as a wife in the romantic sense. She was being purchased as a breeding vessel for the Al-Rashid dynasty. Yassin's face had gone pale during his father's announcement. "Father, that wasn't part of our agreement." I said many things," Omar cut him off coldly. "But the bottom line remains unchanged. This marriage serves a purpose, and that purpose requires results. 18 months is generous. Most families in our position would expect an heir within the first year." Zara looked at the documents in her hands, seeing them now not as a contract, but as a bill of sale. Every generous provision, every protection for her village, every promise of respect and partnership, all of it was contingent on her ability to produce a child within a deadline, like some kind of human livestock. "And if no child comes within 18 months?" she asked quietly. Omar's expression hardened. "Then the arrangement will be reconsidered. The financial support for your family and village would naturally be adjusted to reflect the changed circumstances." The threat was clear, even wrapped in euphemistic language. If she failed to conceive quickly enough, everyone she cared about would suffer the consequences. The protection she was trying to secure for her community was conditional on her reproductive performance. Fatima, who had been quietly listening to the entire exchange, stepped forward with the fierce protectiveness of a mother lioness. "You are talking about my daughter as if she were a farm animal," she said, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "She is a human being with feelings and rights that go beyond your business interests." Omar turned his calculating gaze on Fatima, and for a moment Zara feared he might withdraw his offer entirely in response to the challenge. But instead, he nodded slowly. "You are correct, madam. Your daughter is a remarkable young woman, which is precisely why I have chosen her for my son. But I am also a businessman, and this arrangement represents a significant investment in your family's future. I require assurance that the investment will yield appropriate returns. What happens if we refuse?" Hassan asked, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer. "Then you refuse," Omar said with deceptive mildness. "I will respect your decision and leave immediately. Of course, the various infrastructure projects that were planned for this region will need to be reconsidered, and certain administrative oversights regarding water rights and electrical service might require attention from the appropriate authorities." The villagers who had been listening to the exchange began murmuring among themselves with growing alarm. The implications of Omar's words were clear to everyone. Refusal meant not just losing the promised improvements, but facing active punishment. That could make their community uninhabitable. Zara closed her eyes, feeling the weight of impossible choices pressing down on her like a landslide. Every option led to suffering, her own if she agreed, her community's if she refused. The only question was which kind of sacrifice she could live with. "I need a moment to think," she said. "Of course," Omar replied, checking his watch again. "But please remember that I have a schedule to maintain." Zara walked a few steps away from the group, seeking space to process the new reality that had been thrust upon her. Yasin followed, his face showing the same shock and distress she felt. "I didn't know," he said urgently, keeping his voice low, enough that the others couldn't hear. "I swear to you, I had no idea he was going to add that condition. The timeline, the pressure, none of it was discussed with me." "It doesn't matter whether you knew," Zara replied numbly. "The requirement exists now." "We could find a way around it," Yasin said desperately. "Medical issues, complications. There are reasons why pregnancies might not occur immediately." Zara looked at him with something approaching pity. "Your father doesn't seem like a man who accepts excuses or delays. If we can't meet his expectations, he'll find another way to get what he wants." "Then what do we do?" The question hung between them like a blade. Zara stared out at the mountains that had sheltered her entire life, knowing that she was about to leave them behind for a world where her value would be measured in terms of her ability to produce heirs for a man she barely knew. But as she looked back at the village square, she saw the faces of people who had been part of her world since childhood. Children who deserved the chance to receive proper education, elderly people who needed medical care, families who could prosper if given the right opportunities. Her personal happiness weighed against their collective welfare. It wasn't really a choice at all. "We do what we have to do," she said finally, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. They returned to the group, where Omar was making increasingly impatient gestures toward his assistant. Zara took the pen that was offered to her and signed her name to each document, her signature sealing not just her fate, but the fate of everyone she loved. "Excellent," Omar said, his satisfaction evident as he collected the signed papers. "The wedding will take place in Casablanca in 2 weeks. That will give us time to make appropriate arrangements, and for you to prepare yourself for your new life." "2 weeks?" Hassan exclaimed. "That's not enough time to. It's sufficient." Omar cut him off. "My staff will handle all the necessary preparations. Zara will come with us today to begin the transition process." The words hit the family like a thunderbolt. They had expected some time to say goodbye, to help Zara prepare for her new life, to gradually adjust to the reality of separation. Today? Fatima whispered, her face going white with shock. "The sooner the transition begins, the easier it will be for everyone involved," Omar said, with the detached efficiency of someone discussing a business merger. "Prolonged goodbyes only make the adjustment more difficult." Zara felt as though the ground was crumbling beneath her feet. She had agreed to the marriage, accepting the sacrifice as necessary, but she hadn't anticipated being torn away from her family immediately. The finality of it was overwhelming. "I need to pack my things," she said weakly. "That won't be necessary," Omar replied. "You'll have everything you need in Casablanca. Your old belongings would be inappropriate for your new station in life anyway." The dismissal of her personal possessions, the books that had shaped her mind, the clothes her mother had sewn with love, the small treasures that connected her to her childhood, felt like another kind of death. She was being asked to shed not just her freedom, but her very identity. Yasin stepped closer, his voice urgent. "Father, surely she should be allowed to bring some personal items. Things that have sentimental value." Omar considered this for a moment, then nodded grudgingly. "Very well. 10 minutes to collect essential items only. Nothing excessive." As Zara hurried toward her family's house, her parents and several neighbors following behind, she felt as though she was moving through a dream. Everything seemed unreal, too sudden and brutal to be actually happening. In her small room, she quickly gathered the few things that meant the most to her: her grandmother's prayer beads, a photo of her family, her favorite book of poetry, and the small carved wooden bird her father had made for her childhood. Everything else, the life she had built, the dreams she had nurtured, The future she had planned would remain in this mountain village while she was carried off to face an uncertain destiny. When she emerged from the house, carrying a small cloth bundle, her parents were waiting with tears in their eyes. The goodbye was brief and heartbreaking, filled with promises to write and visit that everyone knew might be difficult to keep. As the convoy prepared to leave, with Zara sitting beside Yasin in the second vehicle, she took one last look at the village that had shaped her. The mountains rose around them like protective walls, the olive groves spread across the slopes like a green blessing, and the people she loved stood watching her departure with expressions of love. Grief and hope mingled together. The vehicles pulled away, carrying her toward a future that felt as foreign and intimidating as another planet. But as they descended the mountain road, Zara made a silent promise to herself. She would survive this new world. She would find a way to honor both her sacrifice and her values. And somehow, she would ensure that the price she was paying would purchase something worthy of its cost. Behind them, the village of Tafraout grew smaller and smaller until it finally disappeared behind the curve of the mountain, taking with it the last remnants of Zara's old life and leaving her to face whatever lay ahead with nothing but her courage and the uncertain alliance she had formed with the man sitting silently beside her. The journey to Casablanca took 6 hours, winding down from the mountain heights through increasingly urban landscapes that seemed to mock every mile of distance between Zara and her former life. She watched through tinted windows as traditional villages gave way to sprawling suburbs, then to the gleaming towers of Morocco's economic capital rising against the Atlantic horizon, like monuments to a world she had only read about in books. Yasin sat beside her in respectful silence for most of the journey, occasionally pointing out landmarks or explaining aspects of the changing scenery, but seeming to understand that she needed time to process the magnitude of what had just happened to her. The convoy moved with the smooth efficiency of serious money. Police escorts appeared at major intersections. Traffic seemed to part before them, and their progress was unimpeded by the usual chaos of Moroccan roads. When they finally entered Casablanca proper, Zara was overwhelmed by the sheer scale of everything. Buildings stretched toward the sky in glass and steel symphonies. Traffic flowed in rivers of expensive cars, and everywhere she looked there were signs of wealth that made her mountain village seem like something from another century. The Hassan I Mosque dominated the coastal skyline, its minaret reaching toward heaven like a prayer made manifest in stone and marble. "It's beautiful," she said softly, speaking for the first time in hours. "And overwhelming," Yasin added with understanding. "I remember feeling lost here when I first returned from university in Paris. It takes time to adjust to the pace of city life." The convoy turned into an exclusive district where the buildings became progressively more luxurious, protected behind high walls and elaborate security gates. Finally, they approached a massive compound that seemed to occupy an entire city block. Its walls topped with decorative ironwork that was beautiful enough to disguise their prison-like effectiveness. Omar's estate was unlike anything Zara could have imagined. The main house was a masterpiece of modern Moroccan architecture, combining traditional elements like carved cedar and zellige tilework with contemporary luxury that spoke of unlimited resources. Fountains danced in marble courtyards, palm trees swayed in perfectly manicured gardens, and the overall effect was of stepping into a world where money had transformed human desires into physical reality. As they passed through the security checkpoint, Zara noticed the guards, not the casual watchmen of her village, but serious professionals with alert eyes and sophisticated communication equipment. Whatever else this place was, it was clearly designed to keep the world outside at bay. "Your new home," Omar announced as the vehicles came to a stop before the main entrance. The words sent a chill through Zara, emphasizing that this transition was permanent and absolute. A small army of staff appeared as if from nowhere: housekeepers, drivers, gardeners, and others whose specific roles weren't immediately clear. They moved with the practiced efficiency of people accustomed to serving wealthy families, and Zara was struck by how invisible they seemed, present but somehow beneath the notice of their employers. Zara will be staying in the guest wing until the wedding, Omar informed his assembled staff. She is to be treated with the respect due to a future member of this family, and her comfort is a priority. Mrs. Benali will oversee her needs and help her prepare for the transition. An elegant middle-aged woman stepped forward, her manner professional but not unkind. Dressed in expensive but modest clothing, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who held real authority within the household hierarchy. "Welcome, Miss Zara," Mrs. Benali said warmly. "I am the household manager. I'll be happy to help you settle in and answer any questions you might have." As Omar disappeared into the main house, presumably to attend to business matters, Yasin turned to Zara with an expression of apology mixed with helplessness. "I know this is overwhelming," he said quietly. "If you need anything, or if you want to talk about what's happening, please don't hesitate to ask for me. I'll be staying in the main house, but I'm available whenever you need someone to listen." Mrs. Benali led Zara through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, past rooms filled with artwork and furniture that probably cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. The guest wing, when they finally reached it, was larger than her entire family home had been, appointed with luxury that made her feel like an imposter in her simple mountain clothes. "These will be your quarters until the wedding," Mrs. Benali explained, opening doors to reveal a sitting room, bedroom, and private bathroom that featured marble surfaces and fixtures that belonged in a palace. "The wardrobe has been stocked with appropriate clothing in your size. Meals can be served here or in the main dining room, as you prefer. There's a library down the hall, and the gardens are available for your enjoyment." Zara stood in the center of the opulent bedroom, feeling smaller and more displaced with each passing moment. The bed alone was larger than the room she had shared with her sister before her sister's marriage, and a view from the window showed manicured grounds that stretched to the horizon. "How do you know my size?" she asked, the practical question helping her focus on something concrete rather than the overwhelming luxury surrounding her. Mrs. Benali's smile was knowing but discreet. "Mr. Omar is very thorough in his preparations. The clothing has been selected by a professional stylist, based on your measurements and what will be appropriate for your new position. Tomorrow, if you're comfortable with it, we'll have additional fittings for your wedding dress and formal wardrobe." The casual efficiency with which her life was being reorganized was both impressive and terrifying. Every detail had been anticipated and arranged as if she were a piece being moved on a chessboard rather than a human being with preferences and feelings. "What if the clothes don't suit me?" Zara asked, testing the boundaries of her new situation. "Then we'll arrange for alterations or replacements," Mrs. Benali replied without hesitation. "Mr. Omar wants you to be comfortable and confident. This transition is significant for everyone involved, and we want to make it as smooth as possible." After Mrs. Benali left, Zara found herself alone in her luxurious prison. She opened the wardrobe to find clothing that was clearly expensive and well chosen, but felt as foreign as costumes for a play she hadn't auditioned for. Designer dresses, silk blouses, tailored pants, and shoes that cost more than her father earned in a month, all in her exact size, all selected by strangers who had studied her from a distance like scientists observing a specimen. She walked to the window and looked out at the gardens, where workers moved quietly among the flower beds like actors in a silent movie. In the distance, she could see the towers of downtown Casablanca and the gleam of the Atlantic Ocean, but they might as well have been on another planet for all the connection she felt to them. A soft knock on the door interrupted her brooding. She opened it to find a young woman about her own age, carrying a tea service on an elegant tray. "Good evening, Miss Zara," the woman said with a shy smile. "I'm Amina. Mrs. Benali sent me to bring you tea and to see if you need anything for this evening." Zara was grateful for the human contact and invited Amina in, hungry for conversation with someone who might understand her situation. As Amina served the tea with practiced grace, Zara studied her face for signs of sympathy or understanding. "Have you worked here long?" Zara asked. 3 years, Amina replied, her tone carefully neutral. "It's a good position. The al-Rashid family treats their staff well, and you've seen other arrangements like mine?" Amina's hands paused for just a moment in their work, and Zara caught a flicker of something, sympathy, perhaps, or recognition. "Mr. Yassin has never been married before," she said diplomatically. "This is new for everyone." The careful phrasing told Zara more than a direct answer would have. Clearly, the staff had been instructed on what topics were appropriate for discussion. And her personal situation was not among them. "What is he like?" Zara asked. "Mr. Yassin, I mean. When he's here, how does he behave with the staff?" This question seemed safer, and Amina's expression relaxed slightly. "He's kind," she said simply. "Polite. He remembers people's names and asks about their families. Very different from his father in that way." The distinction was telling. Omar clearly ruled through intimidation and control, while his son seemed to have retained some basic human decency despite his upbringing. "And the wedding preparations?" "They'll be magnificent," Amina said with genuine enthusiasm. "Mrs. Benali has been coordinating with the best vendors in the city. The ceremony will be held in the grand ballroom here at the estate, with reception facilities for over 300 guests. 300 guests for a wedding between two people who barely knew each other seemed like an elaborate performance, rather than a celebration. But Zara was beginning to understand that nothing in Omar's world was simple or private. After Amina left, Zara attempted to eat the dinner that had been prepared for her, but found her appetite had disappeared along with her freedom. Instead, she sat by the window as darkness fell over the city, watching the lights come on in buildings filled with people living their chosen lives. Her reflection in the window showed a young woman in simple clothes surrounded by luxury she had never asked for, and the contrast seemed to symbolize everything that had gone wrong with her life in the space of a single day. This morning, she had been teaching children under an olive tree in a mountain village. Tonight, she was a prisoner in a golden cage, counting down the days until she would be married to a stranger and expected to produce an heir for a dynasty she wanted no part of. A second knock on her door brought Yassin, who entered cautiously. After she gave permission, he had changed from his travel clothes into casual pants and a shirt. That made him look younger and less intimidating than he had in the village. "I wanted to check on you," he said, his concern seeming genuine. "I know today has been overwhelming." "That's one word for it," Zara replied, gesturing for him to sit in one of the silk-upholstered chairs. "This is all very beautiful, but it feels like I'm visiting a museum rather than staying in a home." Yassin nodded with understanding. "I felt the same way when I moved back from Paris. Everything here is designed to impress rather than comfort. It takes time to find spaces that feel genuinely welcoming." "Do such spaces exist here?" "A few," he said with a slight smile. "The library is my refuge. It has comfortable chairs, and nobody bothers me there. There's also a small garden behind the kitchen where the staff sometimes take their breaks. It feels more human." The fact that he sought out spaces away from the main luxury suggested that he, too, felt somewhat displaced in his father's world. "Yassin," Zara said carefully, "what happens if we can't meet your father's expectations? The 18-month requirement. What if it doesn't happen?" His face grew serious, and she could see him struggling with how much honesty their situation warranted. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "My father doesn't typically accept failure, but he also doesn't typically explain his contingency plans. I think we have to hope that if we show good faith effort, and if we build a genuine partnership, he'll be more flexible than his initial demands suggest. And if he's not?" Yasin was quiet for a long moment. Then we'll face that situation when it arises. But Zara, I want you to know that whatever happens, I won't let you bear the consequences alone. If there are problems, if my father becomes unreasonable, we'll figure out solutions together. The promise was comforting, though Zara wondered how much power Yasin actually had to protect her from his father's demands. Still, it was something to hold on to in a world where she controlled virtually nothing else. As he prepared to leave, Yasin paused at the door. The wedding preparations will begin in earnest tomorrow. If any of it becomes too much, if you need a break or want to change something, please let me know. I may not be able to alter the fundamental situation, but I can at least try to make the details more bearable. After he left, Zara prepared for bed in the most luxurious bathroom she had ever seen, trying on the silk nightgown that had been provided for her. The mirror showed a young woman playing dress-up in a life that didn't belong to her, and she found herself wondering if she would recognize herself at all by the time this transformation was complete. As she lay in the enormous bed, surrounded by comfort that felt more suffocating than welcoming, Zara stared up at the ceiling and tried to imagine a future where this golden cage might become something approaching a home. The challenge would be maintaining her sense of self while adapting to expectations that seemed designed to erase everything she had ever been. Tomorrow would bring wedding preparations, dress fittings, and the beginning of her transformation. From mountain rose to wealthy man's wife. But tonight, in the silence of her luxury prison, she grieved for the life she had lost and tried to gather the strength she would need for whatever lay ahead. The wedding preparations began before dawn. With the arrival of a small army of professionals who transformed the Al-Rashid estate into something resembling a movie set, Zara watched from her window as florists arranged elaborate displays, caterers organized equipment for feeding hundreds of guests, and decorators hung silk draping that turned the main ballroom into a palace worthy of Arabian Nights fantasies. She had barely finished her morning tea when Mrs. Ben Ali arrived with a schedule that mapped out every minute of the next 10 days leading to the ceremony. Hair consultations, makeup trials, dress fittings, jewelry selection, photography sessions, rehearsal dinners, and meetings with Omar's social circle, all designed to transform her from mountain village teacher into the perfect billionaire's daughter-in-law. The first priority is your wedding dress, Mrs. Ben Ali announced, leading Zara toward a room that had been converted into a temporary fashion studio. Madame Farida is Morocco's most exclusive designer. She created gowns for 3 royal weddings and charges accordingly, but Mr. Omar insisted on the best. Madame Farida turned out to be a whirlwind of creative energy and expensive perfume, surrounded by assistants who moved with the precision of surgical instruments. She examined Zara with the analytical gaze of an artist studying a blank canvas, taking measurements and making notes while discussing fabric choices and design elements as if Zara were an interesting mannequin rather than the person who would actually wear the result. Exquisite bone structure, Madame Farida murmured to her assistants in rapid French. The skin tone will be magnificent with ivory silk and gold embroidery. Very traditional, very elegant, but with enough contemporary elements to photograph. Well for the society magazines. Zara stood motionless during the measurements, feeling increasingly disconnected from the woman these people were describing. The dress they were designing sounded beautiful, but it was meant for someone playing the role of Omar's perfect daughter-in-law, not for the person she actually was. "Do I have any input into the design?" she asked quietly. Madame Farida looked surprised by the question. "Of course, Sherry. What elements are important to you?" Zara thought about the simple white dress her mother had embroidered for religious festivals, about the traditional Berber jewelry her grandmother had worn on special occasions. Could we incorporate some traditional mountain elements? Maybe some silver embroidery patterns from my region? Asterisk, the designer's eyes lit up with professional interest. Interessant. A fusion of mountain tradition with urban sophistication. Yes, this could be quite striking. Do you have examples of the traditional work? For the first time since arriving in Casablanca, Zara felt a spark of genuine enthusiasm. She retrieved her grandmother's prayer beads and a small embroidered cloth from her belongings, showing Madame Farida the intricate geometric patterns that had been passed down through generations of mountain women. Beautiful, the designer breathed, studying the traditional motifs with obvious appreciation. We can adapt these patterns into the gold embroidery, create something that honors both your heritage and your new position. It will make the dress unique, not just another wealthy wedding gown, but something with real cultural significance. As the morning progressed through fittings and consultations, Zara began to feel slightly more grounded. The idea that her wedding dress might carry some connection to her roots made the entire performance feel less artificial, less like a complete erasure of her identity. The afternoon brought a different challenge, meeting Omar's social circle. The estate's main salon filled with elegant women who belonged to Casablanca's elite social scene, all eager to inspect the mysterious mountain girl who had captured the Al-Rashid air. They arrived in expensive cars wearing designer clothes and jewelry that could have funded entire villages, their conversation a mixture of Arabic, French, and English that demonstrated their international sophistication. So interesting that Yasin chose someone so authentic, remarked Lala Khadija, the wife of a prominent bank executive, her tone suggesting that authentic was not necessarily a compliment in their social sphere. She's quite beautiful, added Madame Bensouda, whose husband controlled several major hotels along the coast. Very striking features. The photographers will love her for the wedding coverage. Zara sat among them drinking tea, eating delicate pastries, feeling like an exhibit in a cultural museum. They asked polite questions about her background, but their interest seemed more anthropological than personal, as if she represented an exotic specimen they were studying for entertainment. How refreshing to have someone from outside our usual circles, declared Lala Aisha, whose family had diplomatic connections throughout North Africa. It will bring such interesting diversity to our group. The patronizing tone made Zara's stomach tighten, but she maintained the polite smile Mrs. Benali had coached her to wear during social interactions. These women would be her social peers after the wedding, and alienating them would only make her future more difficult. Tell us about mountain life, requested Madame Bensouda with the enthusiasm of someone asking about a foreign travel destination. It must be so simple and peaceful up there. It has its own complexities, Zara replied carefully. Different challenges from city life, but certainly not simple. Managing livestock, dealing with weather variations, maintaining community relationships. In a small population, these all require considerable skill and social intelligence. Her response seemed to surprise them slightly, as if they had expected her to confirm their assumptions about rural simplicity rather than defend the sophistication of mountain culture. Of course, Lala Khadija said quickly. We didn't mean to suggest otherwise. It's just so different from what we're accustomed to. The conversation continued in this vein for over an hour, with the women offering advice about adjusting to wealthy society, recommendations for shopping and social activities, and subtle warnings about the expectations that would accompany her new status. By the time they left, Zara felt exhausted from the effort of being constantly evaluated and found either charming or deficient, depending on their particular prejudices. That evening brought a private dinner with Yasin, the first time they had been able to speak freely since arriving at the estate. He had spent his day dealing with business obligations and wedding logistics, and looked as drained as she felt. How was your introduction to Casablanca society? He asked with a knowing smile. Educational, Zara replied diplomatically. They seem to view me as an interesting anthropological study. Yasin laughed, the sound genuine and warm. That's actually progress. When I brought university friends home, they used to look at anyone from outside their immediate social circle as potential threats to the established order. At least curiosity is better than hostility. Is that what I should expect after we're married? To be treated as a curiosity indefinitely? Some of them will always see you that way, Yasin said honestly. But others will come to respect you. Once they realize you're not intimidated by their wealth or impressed by their status symbols. The secret to dealing with that crowd is showing them you have something they can't buy: intelligence, authenticity, moral clarity. Zara appreciated his honesty, though it didn't entirely ease her concerns about navigating a social world where she would always be an outsider. What about your father's business associates? Will I be expected to entertain them as well? Probably, though those relationships are different. Business entertaining is more formal, more focused on specific objectives. You'll mostly need to look elegant and make polite conversation while the men discuss deals and politics. The casual way he described her future role as decorative accompaniment to business dealings reminded Zara of how fundamentally her life was changing. In her village, women's voices carried weight in community decisions. Here, she was expected to be an attractive accessory to her husband's professional obligations. Yasin, she said carefully, when we're married, will I have any purpose beyond being your wife and producing children? Any way to contribute something meaningful? His expression grew thoughtful. What kind of contribution did you have in mind? Education, maybe. Community development. Things that actually help people rather than just maintaining social appearances. Those are the kinds of activities my father tolerates as long as they don't interfere with family obligations, Yasin said. And having a wife involved in charitable work actually enhances a businessman's reputation. It shows social responsibility and community engagement. Zara felt a flicker of hope. So I could potentially establish educational programs? Maybe literacy, classes for women, or professional development workshops. Within limits, yes. The key would be framing it properly, not as political activism, but as family philanthropy. Omar al-Rashid's daughter-in-law helping less fortunate women improve their circumstances. It could actually become a significant platform if managed correctly. For the first time since this nightmare began, Zara glimpsed possibilities that didn't involve complete sacrifice of her values and interests. If she had to play the role of wealthy wife, perhaps she could use that position to accomplish things that mattered to her. The conversation was interrupted by Omar's arrival, impeccably dressed for an evening business event. He surveyed them both with the satisfaction of a man whose plans were proceeding smoothly. How are the wedding preparations progressing? He asked. Very well, Zara replied before Yasin could answer. Madame Farida is creating something beautiful that incorporates elements from my mountain heritage. Omar's eyebrows rose slightly. Traditional elements? I trust they'll be refined enough for our guest list. They'll be elegant and sophisticated while honoring my cultural background, Zara said firmly, meeting his gaze directly. I thought it important that the dress represent both families being united, not just the al-Rashid legacy. For a moment, Omar studied her with renewed interest, as if reassessing his previous evaluation of her character. Thoughtful, he said finally. Image management is crucial in our social position. A wedding that demonstrates both prosperity and cultural authenticity could be quite advantageous for business relationships. Even her desire to honor her heritage was being evaluated in terms of its marketing potential, but Zara chose to view this as a small victory. If Omar could be convinced that respecting her background served his interests, she might have more freedom to maintain connections to her roots. The guest list has been finalized, Omar continued. Government ministers, business leaders, diplomatic representatives, and select members of international society. This wedding will establish both of you as significant figures in Morocco's cultural and economic landscape. Asterisk, the weight of expectation in his words was crushing. This ceremony wasn't just about two people getting married. It was a public declaration of the al-Rashid family's power and influence, with Zara as a key prop in their performance of success. "No pressure at all," Yasin murmured quietly, earning a sharp look from his father. "Pressure builds character," Omar replied coldly. "Both of you are representing more than your personal interests now. The family reputation, business relationships, and social standing all depend on how successfully you fulfill your roles." After Omar left for his evening appointment, Zara and Yasin sat in contemplative silence, both processing the enormous expectations that had been placed on their shoulders. "Are you ready for this?" Yasin asked quietly. Zara considered the question seriously. Was anyone ever ready to have their entire life transformed overnight? To become a public symbol of someone else's success? To perform happiness while grieving the loss of everything they had ever chosen for themselves? "I don't think readiness is really the issue," she said finally. "I think the question is whether we can find ways to maintain our humanity while playing the roles we've been assigned." "And do you think we can?" Zara looked around the opulent dining room where they sat, thinking about the traditional patterns being woven into her wedding dress, the possibilities for educational work Yasin had described, the small spaces of authentic connection they had managed to create despite the artificial circumstances surrounding them. "Maybe," she said, "if we help each other remember who we are underneath all the performance." As they prepared to separate for the evening, Yasin reached for her hand briefly, a gesture of solidarity that felt more genuine than any of the elaborate preparations surrounding them. "3 more days," he said. "3 more days," she agreed, and then they would be married, bound together in a union neither had chosen, but both were determined to survive with their dignity intact. The performance was about to begin in earnest, but perhaps, if they were careful and supportive of each other, they could find ways to make it feel less like a lie and more like a different kind of truth. The wedding day dawned with perfect weather, and the orchestrated chaos of 300 guests arriving at the al-Rashid estate. Zara stood before the mirror in her bridal suite, transformed by professional makeup and wearing the stunning gown that had become a symbol of 2 worlds, united, silk and gold from Casablanca's finest ateliers, embroidered with silver patterns that carried the ancient wisdom of the Atlas Mountains. Mrs. Ben Ali bustled around making final adjustments while photographers captured every angle for the society magazines that would document this union between power and purity. Through the windows, Zara could see government ministers, business titans, and cultural elites gathering in the gardens, all come to witness Omar's latest demonstration of control and influence. "You look magnificent," Amina whispered as she helped arrange the delicate veil that had been crafted by the same artisans who made ceremonial garments for royalty. Like a queen from the old stories, the ceremony itself passed in a blur of ritual and performance. Zara moved through the traditional proceedings with the grace she had cultivated over weeks of coaching, speaking her vows in Arabic while trying to find meaning in words that had been written for someone else's love story. Yasin stood beside her, equally magnificent in his traditional formal wear, both of them playing their parts in Omar's elaborate production. When the imam pronounced them husband and wife, the assembled crowd erupted in celebration that felt genuine despite the artificial circumstances of their union. For a moment, surrounded by music and flowers and the joy of 300 people, Zara almost believed in the fairy tale they were performing. The reception was a masterpiece of social theater. Government officials offered congratulations while positioning themselves for future business opportunities. International diplomats praised the cultural significance of the union. Society matrons declared it the most elegant wedding of the season, while subtly maneuvering for invitations to future al-Rashid events. Through it all, Omar moved like a conductor orchestrating a symphony, ensuring that every conversation served his interests and every photograph would enhance the family's prestige. He was in his element, transforming even his son's wedding into a networking opportunity that would pay dividends for years to come. But as the evening progressed, Zara noticed something unexpected. Yasin, despite his earlier resignation to their fate, seemed increasingly uncomfortable with the spectacle. During the elaborate dinner, when speeches praised their perfect love story, his smile became more strained. When business associates congratulated him on acquiring such a prize, his jaw tightened visibly. The breaking point came during the traditional money dance, when wealthy guests pinned expensive jewelry and cash to the bride's dress as a display of their generosity and status. As one particularly obnoxious oil executive made crude comments about investment returns while pinning a diamond brooch to her gown, Zara saw something snap behind Yasin's eyes. "That's enough," Yasin said quietly, stepping between the man and his wife. "Thank you all for your generosity, but my wife is not a commodity to be evaluated." The words created a moment of shocked silence in their immediate vicinity. Omar, who had been networking across the room, appeared at Yasin's side with lightning speed, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Yasin," Omar said through gritted teeth, "perhaps you need some air." "No, father. What I need is for people to stop treating my wife like a business transaction you've arranged for their entertainment." The confrontation was quiet but electric, drawing attention from nearby guests who sensed drama beneath the polite surface. Zara found herself caught between pride in Yasin's defense of her dignity and terror at the consequences of defying Omar so publicly. "We'll discuss this later," Omar hissed, but Yasin wasn't finished. "Actually, let's discuss it now," Yasin said, his voice carrying clearly enough for several nearby groups to hear. "This woman gave up everything to marry me, her home, her family, her freedom. The least we can do is treat her with the respect she deserves, instead of parading her around like a trophy you've won." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Zara realized that something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't just about social awkwardness or wedding day stress. Yasin was publicly rejecting the entire premise of their arrangement. Omar's face went through a series of expressions before settling on cold calculation. "I think the bride and groom are tired," he announced to the nearby guests with a forced smile. "Perhaps it's time for them to retire for the evening." Asterisk as they were guided away from the reception, Zara caught glimpses of shocked faces and heard the buzz of excited gossip beginning among the guests. Whatever had just happened, it would be the talk of Casablanca society for months. In the privacy of the bridal suite, Omar's mask finally slipped completely. "Have you lost your mind?" he demanded of his son. "Do you have any idea what you've just done to our reputation?" "I've defended my wife's dignity," Yasin replied steadily. "Something you apparently forgot to include in your grand plans." "Your wife's dignity?" Omar's laugh was harsh and bitter. "She's a mountain peasant who should be grateful for the opportunity to join civilized society. Instead, you're treating her like some kind of princess who deserves special consideration." "She deserves basic human respect," Yasin shot back. "And if you can't see that, then maybe your plans for our marriage need to be reconsidered." Zara watched the confrontation with growing amazement. This was not the resigned, intimidated son she had expected to marry. Something had awakened in Yasin during the ceremony, perhaps seeing her actually go through with the sacrifice, perhaps witnessing the crude way their guests had treated her, or perhaps simply reaching a breaking point with his father's control. "Let me be very clear," Omar said, his voice dangerously quiet. "This marriage serves specific purposes, and those purposes will be fulfilled regardless of your sudden attack of conscience. You will apologize to our guests, you will consummate this marriage, and you will produce the heir I require. Any deviation from this plan will have consequences you're not prepared to face." "Then maybe it's time I learned to face those consequences," Yasin replied. The words seemed to surprise even him, as if he hadn't known he was capable of such defiance. But once spoken, they seemed to give him strength rather than fear. Omar stared at his son for a long moment, clearly recalculating his approach. When he spoke again, his tone was different, still threatening, but more strategic. You think you're protecting her, he said, gesturing toward Zara. But your rebellion will only make things worse for both of you. I have invested too much in this arrangement to accept failure. If you can't fulfill your obligations willingly, I'll find other ways to ensure compliance. What other ways? Zara asked, speaking for the first time since the confrontation began. Omar's smile was cold and knowing. Your village, my dear. Those infrastructure improvements, the water rights, the electrical service, all of it depends on this marriage proceeding. As planned. If my son continues this foolish resistance, I may need to demonstrate that my agreements are conditional on cooperation. The threat hit Zara like a physical blow. In standing up for her, Yasin had potentially endangered everyone she loved in Tafraout. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders again, heavier than ever. But as she looked at Yasin, really looked at him for the first time, she saw something that changed everything. This wasn't the intimidated, controlled son Omar had described. This was a man who had found his courage, who was willing to risk everything to protect someone he barely knew, who had chosen human decency over family loyalty. Omar, she said quietly, using his first name deliberately, what if we offered you something better than compliance? Both men stared at her in surprise. Omar's eyebrows rose with interest despite himself. What if instead of a reluctant son and a resentful daughter-in-law producing an heir out of obligation, you had willing partners who could represent your family with genuine grace and authentic happiness? What if this marriage became real? Omar studied her face intently. And why would you suggest such a thing? Zara looked at Yasin, seeing in his eyes the same possibility she was beginning to feel. Because I think your son and I might actually be able to build something worth having together. Not because we're forced to, but because we choose to. The 18-month requirement remains non-negotiable, Omar said firmly. Then let us try to meet it as partners rather than prisoners, Zara replied. Give us the space to build a real relationship, and we'll give you the family legacy you want. But it has to be real, Omar. It has to be something we create together, rather than something you force upon us. The room fell silent as Omar considered this unexpected proposition. Finally, he nodded slowly. 6 months, he said. I'll give you 6 months to prove that this ... partnership can produce results. But if it fails, we return to the original arrangement with no further discussion. As Omar left them alone, Zara and Yasin found themselves truly together for the first time, not as victims of circumstance, but as two people who had chosen to face an impossible situation with honesty and courage. Are you sure about this? Yasin asked quietly. Zara thought about her village in the mountains, about the dreams she had sacrificed, about the life that might be possible if they could make this choice work. I'm sure that I'd rather try to build something real with someone I respect than spend my life pretending to be happy in a loveless arrangement, she said. The question is whether you're willing to try as well. Yasin's answer came not in words, but in the gentle way he took her hand. And in that moment, Zara realized that sometimes the greatest victories come not from escaping impossible situations, but from finding ways to transform them into something worth having. The mountain rose had been transplanted to foreign soil, but perhaps, with care and courage, she could bloom in ways she had never imagined possible. The real story was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.